This is Gary Johnson. He is one of the most popular third-party candidates in U.S. history. He and his party, the Libertarian Party, are running on a platform of non-interventionalism, laissez-faire capitalism, protecting civil liberties, and shrinking the size and scope of government.
I think I could stand up there for the whole debate and not say anything and emerge as a leader.
This is Jill Stein, running on a platform promoting environmentalism, grassroots democracy, social justice, and nonviolence. Her campaign represents record popularity for her party, the Green Party. Now, you may like one or both of these candidates, but if you consider voting for either of them, prepare yourself to meet furious resistance from the protectors of the two-party system.
If you cast a vote for Jill Stein on November 8th, you are essentially saying, I would like Donald Trump to be president. That's right. That's all you're saying.
The facile jab you are most certain to receive is the essence of the argument against all third-party candidates, and it comes in the form of a question. Do you want to throw your vote away? Aside from its military capabilities, the drama of its electoral process, and its relatively low involvement in social programs, the United States government is also pretty exceptional for its two-party system. The UK's list of major political parties includes 16, and at least 3 of them actually are important. Germany has 14 major political parties, India has 7, and Israel has a whopping 15. But we don't really need to go that far to find a third-party success story. We need only look across the one border destined never to be fenced off by a Trump wall to Canada, a land of frozen tundra, dirty oil, and socialized medicine. For generations, Canada was dominated by a two-party political system, a center-left party called the Liberal Party, and a center-right party, which is now called the Conservative Party of Canada, but has throughout history been known variously as the Tory Party, the Progressive Conservatives, and has merged with other conservative parties, including the Reform Party and the Canadian Alliance. But all the way back in 1958, the Canadian Labour Congress and the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation merged to form a new party to challenge the Liberals from the left. By 1961, the party would elect its first leader, Tommy Douglas, and name itself the New Democratic Party. For decades, the NDP's influence in Canada's parliament would wax and wane, but it would always find itself overpowered by the two major parties, which would occupy the two important roles for parties in Canada's system, the government and the official opposition. But after generations of Canadians threw away tens of millions of votes to the NDP, something changed in 2011. A guy named Jack Layton was the head of the NDP at the time and argued that his party would be more effective at ousting the Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Harper was a decidedly effective but incredibly uncharismatic politician. His government was kind of like Canada's own Bush administration. And running against Harper and his government, for the first time the NDP was able to shed its third-party status in 2011, becoming the official opposition. The NDP could no longer be laughed off as a long-shot party. It was in fact in a strong position to become the government of Canada after the next election. Canada's lefties were optimistic that Jack Layton, the charming, mustachioed gentleman, might soon become the next Prime Minister of Canada. But then tragedy struck. Jack Layton died. His replacement would be Thomas Mulcair, under whose leadership the NDP would climb to first place in public polling, and by a significant margin. At the beginning of the 2015 election, the NDP was leading both the Liberal and Conservative parties. The NDP was poised to win, until a different kind of tragedy struck.
It will not go into deficit.
Our first budget, our first fiscal year will be a balanced budget. We firmly believe in that, and it's something that I will accomplish.
The idea that the leftiest major party in Canada would not run a deficit to invest in the economy was troubling to its base. This was a serious problem for the NDP, and it became lethal when the most handsome politician in human history came out and said this.
Mr. Mulcair wants to continue with Mr. Harper's budget plan, committing to balancing the budget no matter what next year, which means he's going to have to cut. Confident countries invest in their own future, and that's what we're going to do.
The traditionally moderate Liberal Party had now poised itself to the left of the Socialists.
That you're outflanking or trying to outflank the NDP on the left.
What we're building a plan around is the need for growth in this country.
And it wasn't long before this happened.
Canadians from all across this great country sent a clear message tonight. It's time for a change in this country, my friends, a real change.
So while the NDP returned to its third-party status at that time, it had successfully pushed the Liberals into being far more left-leaning than they had ever been before. The Liberals currently have the most diverse cabinet in Canadian history and even have plans to totally legalize cannabis. And as for the NDP, well, they're not out for the count yet. We'll of course have to wait until the next election to see if they can return to a position of strength. In the meantime, it's worth noting something else Canada's socialist third party did while its supporters were being told they're throwing away their votes. Remember the NDP's first leader, Tommy Douglas? Well, even before the NDP had ever formed, he ran for office in his home province of Saskatchewan, which is basically the Kansas of Canada. His party at the time was called the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, a democratic socialist party whose popularity nationwide peaked at 15% during the 1945 election. But somehow, in this rural farming province, Douglas managed to become premier, which is basically the Canadian equivalent of governor. In that capacity, Tommy Douglas came up with this far-out idea to create a universal healthcare system in his province. Mind you, this all happened back in the late 1950s during the Red Scare, a time when the United States was so fearful of leftist politics that Hollywood writers like Dalton Trumbo were still being blacklisted, despite the fact that Spartacus was a completely awesome movie. While Tommy Douglas was fighting the good fight on the national level, his successor in Saskatchewan finally implemented his healthcare plan in 1962, more than 5 decades before Bryan Cranston would be cast to play Dalton Trumbo in his 2015 biopic. Within the year, the experiment had proven itself so successful that even conservative Prime Minister and Gremlin lookalike John Diefenbaker was already making moves to implement the system nationwide. And in 1966, Liberal Prime Minister Lester B. Pearson created a system in which the federal government would pay for half of the costs of provincial single-payer healthcare systems. Soon Canada would be so closely associated with socialized medicine that I would feel obliged to mention it just a moment ago in this very video. Canada, a land of frozen tundra, dirty oil, and socialized medicine. But we don't even need to look to foreign countries to see that the two-party system as presently constituted is not essential to the American political system. Republicans and Democrats may have dominated American politics for the last 150 years, but before them came the Whigs, the National Republicans, the Democratic Republicans, and the Federalists. In fact, John Quincy Adams won the presidency after running against 3 members of his own party. And George Washington, he didn't belong to a political party at all. As I think I've shown, throwing away your vote on a third-party candidate in a province or state can actually lead to nationwide change. And throwing it away for a few decades can help to make it a prominent and influential party on the national scale. But what will throwing your vote away to one of the 2 major parties get you? Well, as I explained in my video about the electoral college system, the votes of most people in the United States actually don't really matter. Whether you vote Democratic or Republican, in places like California, Texas, New Jersey, or Mississippi, the outcomes are already expected. So politicians don't have any reason to court your vote. They know in advance who your state's electoral college votes will almost certainly go to. And that's all that really counts. Only the swing states get their limited attention and precious campaign money. So unless you happen to live in a swing state, your vote for Trump or Clinton is essentially being thrown away anyway. But if you vote for a third-party candidate anywhere in the United States, you're helping to increase that party's share of the popular vote. And while a 3% or even a 9% share wouldn't necessarily have the whole country taking these politicians very seriously, the bigger those numbers get, the harder they are to ignore. And with enough support, the Libertarians might be able to force the Republicans to curb their military spending, or the Greens might be able to force the Democrats to support campaign finance reform. With enough time, patience, and votes thrown away, we might actually one day see a Libertarian president, or a Green-dominated Congress. So this election cycle, if you like a third-party candidate, there is plenty of reason for you to go out and vote for them. Of course, you could always hold your nose and vote the lesser of two evils between Trump and Clinton, but if you do, expect people like me to ask you this annoying question.